Hi, I'm Femi OK. Today, a check-in on 3 stories that we're following here on the stream. What happened when Kim met Moon? We will find out. Then, do you know the truth behind how Western museums got many of their artifacts? And we're also going to meet someone who can tell you.
I'm Malika Bilal. I'll be looking for your comments on Twitter and, of course, in our YouTube chat. First, though, to Libya. Take a look at this.
So what you've just been looking at was a video from a detention centre for refugees and migrants in the Libyan capital, Tripoli. It was sent to journalist Sally Hayden by one of the people being held there.
Sally Hayden is with us today from London to tell us more. And we're also joined by Ibrahim Younes. He works for Médecins Sans Frontières and is the head of their Libya mission. He's with us from Tunis.
Sally and Ibrahim, it's good to have you. Sally, I'm going to go straight to my laptop for people who haven't seen your Twitter thread, the one that got so much attention. It starts, for the last 24 hours, I've been texting and calling with refugees in Libya. 500 are apparently struck in a Tripoli prison without food and water after heavy fighting broke out 2 days ago. They say their guards ran away, leaving them alone. That just by itself is striking. But the reaction to the compiled Twitter thread that you put together, what was it?
I mean, so essentially what happened was 26th of August, I got the first message from this group of people who said that they were refugees trapped in a detention center. And obviously it took me about 24 hours to kind of verify they were who they said they were. And that's when I started tweeting this. They were just begging for help. They were begging for someone to help them. They got sent back by the EU-funded Coast Guard anyway, to Libya after the EU essentially said it was a safe country to return people to. They were meant to be under the protection of the UN and instead were just abandoned in the middle of a war zone without food or water and couldn't do anything. So yeah, they appealed to me in health. And I tweeted it. I didn't know what else to do. I pitched a story, but I also tweeted it. And at this stage, it's been viewed more than 2 million times. And thankfully, people are paying attention. But this isn't a new problem. The fighting is new, but the issue isn't new. Like, tens of thousands of people have been locked up indefinitely in Libya because of EU policy. And this is the result of that.
Definitely not new. And Sally, of course, for people who cover this story, they will know the answer to this question I'm about to share with you on Twitter. But for some of our community members, they don't. This is Edward. He says they have no food, but they have phones and internet. Can you explain for our audience how it is that they manage to use those phones that they do have and use WhatsApp to get in touch with you, and then how you were able to verify their stories?
Yeah, sure. I mean, that was what I was very confused about at first as well. I was kind of going, I'm in North London getting messages from someone who says they're in Libya. How is this possible? And they explained to me, essentially, they had tried to get to Italy, to escape to Italy, and the smuggler gives them a phone to contact the Coast Guard, the Italian Coast Guard, who are supposed to rescue them. And instead, they got returned. But they managed to hide that phone, and what they say is the phone is their lifeline. Like, they have no other way to tell anyone what's happening. They guard it with their life, and they charge it in secret. They're getting somebody else in Libya to top it up. And yeah, I was confused by that too, but actually it makes sense. Like, how can you survive without communication? And they're very worried that the phones could get taken away from them and they'll just be abandoned again. Nobody will know what's happening.
Ibrahim, let me bring you into the conversation here. This idea of being registered if you're stuck in Libya is so critical for the refugees, the migrants themselves. Sally here shares this idea and this comment. I'm still getting constant messages from refugees desperate to be registered. All they want is their name on a list, simply so there's some proof they exist. Ibrahim, why is it so difficult?
It was quite... Hello, first. When the interceptions takes place by the Libyan Coast Guard, people were brought back to Libya and directly from the port to these detention centers. And of course, it's arbitrarily detained. The registration mechanism in Libya is quite slow because the number of refugees collectively around Tripoli till just before the 26th was above 5,000, distributed in between 7 to 8 detention centers. And the capacity to register everybody timely was quite slow. And also, when you come to refugee status determination and all that, that takes a long process and a long interviews. So most of these people were not registered, and they were worried that they can also disappear from these detention centers, either being sent away or transferred to somewhere else, or being sent back to the trafficker side. So people are much concerned about their life, their well-being, and they wanted to be registered.
You know, Ibrahim, when you talk about the traffickers, that is a topic of concern among many people, particularly aid people. Of course, this is a video comment I want to share with you. This is from Uthman Bilbaisi. He's the chief of mission for the International Organization for Migrants, and he's in Libya. Here's what he says.
Lately, due to the latest economic, security, and political developments in the country, the situation became more challenging for the migrants. If we want to talk about specific issues migrants face, first I would like to speak about arbitrary detention, so migrants are being detained without due procedures. The second is migrants are being criminalized while the smugglers are free. While migrants are being detained for irregular entry, very limited number of smugglers are being tracked and prosecuted. And the third is that all migrants returned to the Libyan shores by the Libyan Coast Guards automatically are transferred to detention centers.
So Ibrahim, he says that migrants are facing and refugees are facing consequences that smugglers don't.
That's true. That's very true. And I concur with my colleague Osman. We know each other very well. The system that there is no registration, there is no, it's very arbitrarily detained. Of course, that's criminalization of just people trying to seek refuge, fleeing countries of war by itself. For me, it's a big mistake. In terms of traffickers and smugglers, it's part, as you know, Libya is now probably passing through a tough time politically. The law and order enforcement is not in place. So, and most of these rings and trafficker rings is also so much linked to militias. So the fact that there is no law and order to control that, so the victims will more fall on the refugees and migrants.
I'm going to leave this segment, and you, Ibrahim, and you, Sally, with some audio that was sent to Sally earlier on today from an Eritrean man who is in detention right now. I think it really focuses our minds on what is going on in Libya. Have a listen.
Hey there, I'm sending this message straight out from a detention center in Tripoli. We are like in this place like 410 refugees. We are asking for your help. Most of us are Eritrean. We have like 8 pregnant and more than 20 children, and there are many underage. Even this place, no food, no water. We are not registered for 7 months. There is a war around us for 3 weeks. We are asking for the world to help us again and again, but no change until now. Please, we need an evacuation as much as you can, and we are not registered still.
Asking the world for help. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for this conversation today, but you can continue to follow Sally's reporting on Twitter at Sally HAYD. Now, from Libya, we head to the Koreas.
전쟁 없는 한반도가 시작되었습니다. 남과 북은 오늘 한반도 전 지역에서 전쟁을 일으킬 수 있는 모든 위험을 없애기로 합의했습니다.
오늘의 이 순간 역시 역사는 훌륭한 화폭으로 길이 전할 것입니다.
백두에서 한라까지 아름다운 우리 강산을 영구히 핵무기와 핵 위협이 없는 평화의 터전으로 만들어 후손들에게 물려주자고 확약했습니다.
South Korean President Moon Jae-in has just finished a historic three-day trip to Pyongyang for talks with his North Korean counterpart, Kim Jong-un. Moon's visit is only the third for a sitting South Korean president since the division of the Korean Peninsula and comes as nuclear disarmament negotiations between North Korea and the U.S. have stuttered to a halt. So is the rapprochement between the neighbors in danger or just getting started?
Joining us to debrief the stream on what happened when Kim met Moon, Christine Ahn is the founder and international coordinator of Women Cross DMZ. And Jenny Town is a research analyst and managing editor at the Stimson Center. Hello, ladies. Good to have you here. Good to have you back again. Christine, so where are we now in terms of the mood of the Korean people? How would you describe it?
Oh, I mean, it's extraordinary. I've received messages from my allies, my partners in South Korea, the women's peace organizations, as well as North Koreans, especially, including a friend that is a defector here in the United States. And everybody is very buoyed. They are inspired. I mean, I was moved to tears watching President Moon address 150,000 North Korean people who stood on their feet throughout the entire speech, waving and cheering. I think that we are in a new era for the Korean Peninsula, and we have commitments from both leaders to not only remove the threat of nuclear weapons from Korea, but also the threat of war. And I think that their commitment to move forward in actionable ways, from demining the DMZ to setting up a reunion center for separated families, just tangible things that are really moving progress between the two Koreas.
Christine, there's someone who might agree with you on Twitter. This is Muna, who says it is a breakthrough. However, they need to be given time. The world wants North Korea to quickly denuclearize, but I guess they will do that in their own time and pace. At least they are opening up. Jenny, I'm wondering if you feel similarly. Do you see this as a breakthrough?
I think it is a breakthrough in the inter-Korean relationship. And the problem is that there's now a lot of things on the agenda that will require cooperation from the United States in order to really move forward and make good on some of the promises that have been made. And I think this is where we run into problems, is that, South Korea is moving forward at a pace much faster than what the U.S. government is comfortable with. And I think there's already some misinterpretations and misunderstandings of what happened at the summit as it relates to U.S. DPRK negotiations on denuclearization. And these misperceptions are really going to cause problems in the future, because it does create false expectations of what those next steps actually are. And I think these are the things that really need to get hashed out now between the U.S. and North Korea directly.
Christine?
Well, I think that North Korea has signaled that they would dismantle two key sites. One is the long-range missile launch pad, and then the other is the Yongbyon nuclear reactor, which have long been the ire of Washington, D.C. But what we know is that North Korea has said that that is contingent upon progress made with the United States. I mean, you can see the images of Libya and the political chaos that that country is in. You see the situation, what happened in Iraq, and now what happened with Iran. And North Korea also has its own history to look at, where 80% of the country was devastated by an indiscriminate U.S. bombing campaign. So I think it's really crucial, I think especially for Americans who are watching the show, is you're not going to see the denuclearization of North Korea unless there is progress towards peace. And that's why I think it's urgent right now to be advancing the conversation about a peace treaty and put it on the table.
I want to share this. Go ahead, Jenny.
Can I just push back a little bit? And I think this is where we need to be very careful, and where precision matters, is because what North Korea did in the declaration is it did promise to and commit to dismantle the launch pad at Sohae, which has been used for satellite launches in the past. But they did not commit to shutting down Yongbyon. They used it as an example, and they basically reiterated that this is a process that can move forward and on an action for action basis and use shutting down Yongbyon as an example. And the problem is that, Secretary Pompeo has already sort of claimed this as a victory of North Korea committed to do this. And that's simply not true. And, as much as it's great that there's renewed enthusiasm for negotiations going forward, if we don't have a clear understanding of what has been committed in order to measure progress, we're going to have a lot of frustrations early on. And so I think we need to be very careful as to what has actually happened, what's on the table, what still needs to be negotiated before we get too far ahead of ourselves and people get really frustrated.
Well, I mean, I don't disagree with that. I just think that it's important to make the case that having face-to-face meetings and dialogue, an actual diplomatic peace process, is what is going to yield the breakthroughs that we see between North Korea and South Korea. And unfortunately, we don't know what state the United States is, because we see many competing messages coming from the Bolton camp or some from the more pro-engagement camp within the Trump administration. And so I think that's where we have to really say that the policy of maximum pressure, which has just been about punishing sanctions, which have not obviously impacted the regime or stopped North Korea from advancing their nuclear weapons program, has totally failed. And what we need right now more than ever is diplomacy and dialogue and meeting face to face. And I think the majority of Koreans around the world would say, let's begin by declaring an end to this war so that there could actually have some movement between the U.S. and North Korea.
Christine, perfect place to pause this conversation. I hear what you're saying. I hear you, Jenny, as well. I think our community would agree. We're going to pause this here for now, though. Thank you to Christine and to Jenny and our community for being with us on the stream again.
So from the Koreas, we head to London.
It's absolutely not the case that everything in the museum's African collections was plundered or looted, or whatever phrase you want to use. But obviously there are certain circumstances or certain events that happen and certain examples, like the Benin bronzes, where that material wouldn't have come into the collection in the same way today.
Well, there's a euphemism. Wouldn't have come into the collection in the same way. Now, of course, it's not just the Benin bronzes that have ended up in Western museums under questionable circumstances. Ethiopia's Magdala treasures, the Elgin marbles, and many more artifacts are at the centre of often very nasty disputes between Western museums and the countries that they've been taken from.
So today we're going to meet a woman who has come up with a novel way to confront the often uncomfortable stories behind some of the world's most prized exhibits. Alice Proctor, welcome to the stream. So excited to have you on after seeing your work. I want to start with our community who love this topic, mostly because they come from countries that want their artifacts back. So this is one person coming out of Nigeria. He writes in, things that they have in their museums that are looted, they should explain how they got them, but they never do. They just put them there with little or no details to say where they were looted from. Britain still has 99.9% of the things that belong to my ancestors, my own. Inexact, unscientific percentage there, but how did you come up with this idea?
So I've been running these tours for a year now, and when I started them, they came from a place of frustration. I had studied art history at university, and I was surrounded by people all the time who worked in museums and art galleries, but didn't necessarily want to have these conversations. So I have a background in museum education. I had the information that I needed to do this work, and I just started running the tours to see what would happen. So when they first ran, they were secret. The galleries had no idea that we were running them at all. I'm still not working for the museums. I do this independently.
Yeah.
So it was a way of bringing the information that I had and appealing to an audience that I knew was there.
So these are uncomfortable art tours, not my description, your description. What is on an uncomfortable art tour? Give us a little show and tell. We're going to show and you're going to tell.
Okay.
Exhibit number 1. Go ahead. Alice, we'll put it on screen. There you go.
Oh, there we go.
Yes.
Okay, so this is a painting of a man called William Fielding. This is in the collection of the National Gallery. Fielding was one of the first British tourists to travel with the East India Company in the 1630s. So this is at a time when Britain is expanding its colonial power. It's creating the trade networks that will become the routes to imperial control over India and large parts of South Asia. And Fielding travels with the company as a tourist. He goes and comes back and dresses up. So this is kind of a 17th century cultural appropriation in the way that he's dressed in this painting. He's wearing a combination of European clothing and the silk jacket and trousers that he's brought back from India with him. He has a servant accompanying him in this painting. We know that 2 servants travel from India back to England with Fielding. We don't know their names. We don't know anything about them. But one of them's been included in this painting, presumably as part of an illustration of his well-traveledness, his power, these connections and these influences that he is now performing back in Britain.
So I want to share this thought from Andrew, who takes it from an interview with you. Andrew says, she says, there's always one side of the story that has been privileged over the other. So his question, is there ongoing efforts to interact with people on the other side of the story and get to know how they feel being, quote unquote, robbed by Europeans for many years? I want to use that to pivot to a question for you, Alice. And what do museum officials think of this? Do they ever talk to you about incorporating this into some of their own tours?
So there are certainly some institutions that are more receptive to this than others. And to be clear, there are plenty of museums that do work with the dispossessed communities to discuss the best way of displaying these objects and to begin negotiations towards repatriation. Most museums aren't doing that. And most museums that I guide in don't actually work with me. They make it very clear that I'm unauthorized. I don't participate in that at all.
So Alice, I just want to make sure that people understand what you're doing. It's kind of sneaky. So you're going into one of the august museums in the United Kingdom in London, and you're having your own secret tour that's going on that's not official, and you're telling people your truth as you see it, the sort of let's get down to basics, the reality behind the pictures and colonialism and the empire, etc. So it just reminds me of a scene from Black Panther where the museum is broken into and then an artifact is taken out and you know that belongs to Wakanda. You're kind of doing that.
I am, except I'm
but you're
white
not stealing
from Australia, and
back.
so I'm talking much more differently about colonial history.
Sure.
I try and use the space of the museum to create an area where we can have these conversations. It's so much more powerful to talk about dispossession, to talk about representation in front of the objects, and to think through the ways that they've been manipulated by the institution, the fact that they have multiple meanings for different people, and every individual who comes into that space will see something different and will engage with that story in a different way. So yeah, they are essentially sneaky tours, although the museums do know about me now, obviously.
And they definitely know about you now.
Yes.
So this comment we got in live from Fiona on YouTube, who says, return the ancestral artifacts, they're worth millions. So speaking of that, tell us about one more, those white cups that we just saw on our screen about a minute ago. What are those?
So that is the wine cup of Shah Jahan, the Mughal emperor. And these are slightly trickier objects because they're an antique when they're acquired by the British. So this cup dates from, as you can see on the screen, 1657, and it's acquired by the British circa 1857. So some of your viewers might know that that's the date of what's either referred to as the First Indian War of Independence or the Sepoy Rebellion, depending what side you're on. It's a moment of enormous conflict that transforms the history of the British in India and is one of the key moments that leads towards the end of the East India Company and the creation of the Queen Victoria as the Empress of India.
Okay.
So those cups are acquired by someone working for the East India Company in very, very dubious circumstances, and they come to the UK via his collection.
Alice, oh my goodness, next time I'm in London, I'm signing up for a secret tour. Alice, thank you so much. Look here on my website, on my laptop here, and you will see Alice's work on her website. It's theexhibitionist.org.
And a reminder to our community, if you have a story you'd like to see on the stream, pitch us at AJ Stream. We'll see you next time.